This is the Intro to Research lecture. My name is Akshay Manglik. I'm a debater at the Harker School. I've been doing debate for a while now. I do LD and policy, both of which involve quite a bit of research, and this presentation will cover quite a bit. As a brief roadmap, we'll go over a couple of different conceptual areas. First, why research itself matters. Second, how to research well. This will obviously be the bulk of the presentation. We'll look at maximizing the effectiveness of Google and how to maximize the effectiveness of other search websites as well. Third, we'll look at how to access different articles, especially if there are paywalls up. And finally, we'll look at how to select sources effectively. So with that, I guess we'll jump right into the lecture. So to begin with, what is research? Research is the process of finding evidence for a debate argument. So this means that you do need to have a purpose going into research. Usually it'll be that you have an assignment to cut a few cards, and you'll be looking for evidence in a variety of mediums. So that can be looking for evidence in books, in physical books, which is the least likely, just because that's how debate used to be, but now way more stuff is online. There are scholarly journals. There are newspapers and blogs, and the focus here will be searching online because there are a lot of different search techniques you can use to do that. And the end goal will usually be to turn these pieces of evidence from different sources into cards, which are just pieces of evidence that we read to support our arguments in different debates. So why research? Obviously, if you're coming here, you have some recognition of the value of research, but there are a lot of different benefits that come from doing good research. First and foremost, it helps you win a lot. Having good cards for your positions means that they will be stronger. It'll mean it's harder for your opponent to rebut them. It'll also make it easier for you to decisively win different issues on the flow, because it'll be easier to weigh, and judges will be more likely to err with your cards. It'll also help with your speaker points. So as I kind of mentioned above, judges really like good evidence, and quite a few will reward that with better speaker points, which can make or break something like making it to elimination rounds. Third, there are a variety of real-world skills that come with research. In your education, at least, whether it's doing research for a history paper or trying to find information about something that you need to do for a class, you'll have to use research and interact with things like Google. And the tips that you'll learn here will help you in doing that, as well as anything you might need in a later job. And finally, research is fun. It may not seem like it at the start, but a lot of debaters do like research. It's a unique and lasting element of debate that a lot of people think that is something very valuable that they get from debate. So with that, I think we'll start the main part of the lecture, which is finding different articles. Because research is the process of finding articles, you'll have to search for them because you won't have them to start with. And the most common way to do that is with Google. So with Google, the bulk of the research is done using Google. It's not the only search engine out there. We'll go through that later, but there are a lot of different tricks and functions that you can use with Google. There is a list. There are many lists online. A good one is here, which I'll send into chat. And you can look into that as you may. But I guess to start with, we'll just go through 9 or so different search functions that are really helpful, that go beyond just typing a simple phrase into Google. So the first Google trick is using quotation marks. And so you can use quotation marks to find exact wordings of an exact wording in your query. And it'll ensure that all results have a certain phrase, and that Google won't search for different synonyms. So this can be helpful with finding arguments for topicality and finding specific terms of art or important phrases in the literature that you might need when you're looking for evidence. So for example, if I were just to search up like capitalism is bad or something, you get a lot of different things. Criticism of capitalism, you get like different reformist pieces, lists, etc., which is a lot of different things, but let's say you just want the phrase capitalism is bad. So put that in quotation marks. And you can see how we have way less results, from millions to only 500,000. And every result here has capitalism is bad, either in the title or in the body of the article itself. And so obviously this is a little bit of a silly example because you wouldn't really search up something like this. But it kind of shows how you can narrow your results to ones that may apply better with the quotation tool. Next is using multiple different words in your search query. It's important to note that when you're doing Google searches, the more words you add, the less results you will get. If I search up capitalism, I will get 123 million results. But if I say capitalism is bad for immigrants, then I will only get 22 million results. And so that's still a lot, but you can see that as we add more words, your search will get narrower and narrower. Because what Google does is it search ups capitalism is bad for immigrants, all as separate words, and every single source needs to have all of those words. However, what you can do is use the OR tool to make sure it's looking for only some of the words in each article. So the format is you have two terms on either side of the OR, and then usually you might have a third term outside of a parenthesis that will that Google will search for no matter what. But this can be useful if you're using something like synonyms. So in this search, we have capitalism or neoliberalism, environmental policy. So capitalism and neoliberalism are different different concepts. They're related, but they are kind of different. But if you're just looking for links to the CapK against apps relating to the environment, then you might want to use both of these. And if you just searched up capitalism, neoliberalism, environmental policy, then you'd be limited to search it to results that had both of those words. But when you do this, you can expand the amount of stuff you can find. So you can see this first Brookings article is about neoliberalism, but the WeForm article is about capitalism. So this is a good way to kind of expand all of the different things you find, especially with similar searches or similar synonyms. Third is word exclusion. Basically what you do is you use the hyphen or the minus symbol on your keyboard to exclude certain words. So you have one term, you have the minus symbol, and then you have a second term. So Google will search for that first term, but if any result has that second term, it'll take out those search results. So here's an example: capitalism unethical minus Marxism. So now when we search up when we search up critiques of capitalism, saying that capitalism may be unethical, the results we get might be critiques of capitalism that aren't focused on Marxism. So they could be criticizing capitalism from different viewpoints, etc. But if we got rid of this exclusion, we go, remember, when we get rid of that exclusion, then we get results about things like communism, etc. And so you can kind of see how word exclusion can lead us to have different results and can help us find more niche arguments. If there's, for example, if there is a common argument throughout the literature that you're researching, you may not want to look at that argument anymore. So you could use the word exclusion tool to get rid of that. You can also use it to in searches when you're using a term that might show up in multiple different contexts. It might show up in a policy context, but maybe it also shows up in like a fashion context or something. And you don't want results about fashion, so you can exclude them. So that's word exclusion. Next, we have site search. So site search means that you can tailor your results so that they only come up on certain websites. So the format is just you have your search term, then you tailor it to a specific website. So if I'm searching up for critiques of capitalism, I can limit it to left publications like Jacobin magazine. And now, because this magazine has a pretty anti-capitalist viewpoint, I can ensure that all of the results I get are critiques of capitalism. Whereas if I limited my search to something like reason.com, then I would get defenses of capitalism. So you can kind of see how if you want to look at certain viewpoints, then you can use the site search to do that. You can also use it to find good sources if you know that there's a particular source you want to get your information from. Fifth is finding synonyms. So you can use, this is called the tilde key. It's just that wavy mark. You might be familiar with using it from verbatim, but you can use it in search terms to find synonyms. So the format here is you have one term, you have the tilde key, and then you have another term. And that second term that you have the tilde key with, Google will search for that term, but also other synonyms it has for that term. So if I search up capitalism tilde green technology, then you can see it says green tech and green capitalism, but you also get things like eco-capitalism. And you might get other searches that have to deal with clean technology or carbon neutral technology, because all of these are associated with the context. And so if there's a search term that you have that have a lot of different synonyms, and you don't want to have to use the OR function every time to list them all out, you can use the synonyms term so that Google will use its own dictionary and sort everything out for you, which can save a lot of time and can help your searches be shorter, which is important because Google limits searches to 32 characters. So next is the define function. What this does is when you're searching up when you use this, it'll just show up and give you definitions. So for example, if I just search up capitalism, I will get this definition of capitalism, but then I'll get like Wikipedia, I'll get a Teen Vogue article, whatever. But if I just want definitions of what capitalism is, then I will get a definition from the Google dictionary, I'll get it from Merriam-Webster, Wikipedia, dictionary.com, etc. So you can see in this context, it can help tailor your search just to finding these definitions, which can be helpful when you're researching topicality, which is all about different definitions. It's important to note that the definitions you get from Google come usually from the Oxford Dictionary. So if you ever if you like the definition you find here and you want to cite it, you can probably search up the Oxford Dictionary and they'll have the same site. And it'll be considered way more reputable than if you cite Google. Seventh, we have the wildcard image, or the wildcard function. I didn't have like a nice Google provided image here, so I just used like the wildcard matchups from like the playoffs this year. But basically what the wildcard does is it fills in phrases you don't know with an asterisk. So it's best to illustrate here. There's like a famous line from the Communist Manifesto that says there was a specter haunting Europe. But if I didn't remember what a part of that phrase, I could just search up there is a asterisk haunting Europe. Okay, I'm doing a lot of searches, so Google probably thinks I'm a robot, which also kind of makes sense, but hold on. And so you can see now what you get is there's all of the quotes saying there's a specter haunting Europe. So if you're unsure about a phrase you remember, then you can get a completion of that phrase. So there's not really a set time when this is useful, but it's pretty versatile, and you'll kind of recognize in the situation when it might be useful. So that's just something to kind of remember in the back of your mind as you're doing searches, but not something you might set out to use. Eighth is searching up by a particular file type. So often when you're doing research, you'll find a lot of different file type. You'll find a lot of different results, but maybe you want to limit it to just scholarly articles or just reports. Usually those reports will be in the form of PDFs that are uploaded to different websites. And so a good shortcut of looking for those is to limit your search just to these PDFs. So you can find official documents, you can find different reports, etc. So you just have your regular search term or your search query, and then you use file type with no space, and then specify the file type. So if I'm looking for information about the jobs report in 2020, then usually I'll get a bunch of like newspapers and stuff. But if I want an actual report on it, I can search by PDF, and now I get the news release from the government or from different educational institutions. So you can kind of see how these will have more analyses. Usually these will be more official, so it can be helpful if you want reliable information. Ninth, we have the around function. This is probably the most helpful and most versatile tool that out of all of these 9. So best for last. Basically, what you use is you have one search term, you have the around function, and then you have a second search term. And inside the around function, you give it a number. And what it'll do is when Google searches for those 2 search terms, it will make sure that every search results have those terms within a certain number of words within each other. So what this will prevent is you getting search results that have, like, in this case, capitalism maybe all the way at the top of the article, and all the way at the bottom of the article talk about like a bridge collapse or something. And obviously that's not what you're looking for when you're searching up like collapse of capitalism. And so what this will do is it'll force Google to find results that actually have where the search terms that you find are related to each other. So it can be very, very useful. If I search up here, capitalism around 5 collapse. So remember, what this is searching for is the words capitalism and collapse around each other within 5 words. If I search that up, I will get like something from Marx, from Marxist.org about the collapse of capitalism, about new economic systems, etc. Whereas if I searched up just like capitalism collapse, I get different arguments. I get like stuff about post-capitalism, maybe older articles, or actually maybe more topical articles about the coronavirus. And you can see how, for example, in this article, the collapsing that it's talking about are about like the foundations of the economy, but not necessarily of the system of capitalism. There's kind of a slight difference there. But really the point is that you can find with this around function different results that are far more tailored to what you actually want. And obviously with all of these different techniques, you can use them in conjunction. So you can use the around function in conjunction with the or function. So you can search up capitalism or neoliberalism and have them be around the environmental policy search. And so as you use more of them stacked on top of each other, you'll get more and more tailored searches that will help you find the evidence that you really want. So that was quite a bit, but all of these different searches and search terms can be really helpful. So I'd recommend you try and use them when you're searching something instead of just doing one search without any of these search techniques and giving up. So there are some other tips that aren't exactly related to what you put in your search terms, but are still really helpful. So one thing you can do when you're trying to search things up is search things up in incognito. And so the thing about incognito is that what Google can sometimes do is when you're searching stuff up in your regular life, you may read certain ideological content. So if you're a liberal, then you may read from a lot of liberal publications. If you're a conservative, you may read from a lot of conservative publications. And what Google will do over time is kind of learn, okay, Akshay likes to read liberal publications or conservative publications, so he'll get more news from each of those. But when you're doing the searches, you don't want it to be limited just to what you're used to publishing. In fact, you want it to search for things that you're not used to looking at, because that's where you'll find the new evidence that you're looking for, because you'll have already searched within those publications. So you can go within incognito so that it won't recognize your past searches and can eliminate some bias in your searches. So that may not always work, but sometimes it can be helpful. So if you're having trouble with some of your searches, maybe try that out. Sorry. Another thing that you can do is expand the number of search results you get. So if you notice that when you're usually doing searches, you'll probably only get 10 results and then it'll stop. But what I get is 100 results, which is obviously way more. So why do I do that? The reason I do that is whenever you hit a hard limit when you're doing searches, you're likely to just give up because it takes effort to go to the next page and you may not feel like it. Whereas if you're just scrolling through results, you're way more likely to just scroll through them and kind of keep looking because there's no interruptions in what you're doing. So the more you can reduce those interruptions in your searches, the more you can trick your brain itself into doing more research when you wouldn't have. And often some of the results towards the bottom may be the best results or the most specific results. So with that said, how do you actually carry this out? If you go to settings and then click search settings, as I just did, and this can be on any Google search, you'll come to a page for your account, your Google account, where you can tailor how many results you want per page. I recommend 100. Usually it'll take a little more time to search up, but it'll be the most helpful in the long run. But if you want to, you can just have 50 or 40 or whatever. But I do recommend expanding it beyond the regular 10 because that can really help you look for more sources that you may not have intended to when you're originally starting to search. Finally, you can adjust the recency of your results. So maybe you're doing research and you want stuff that's really recent, taking into account the recent protests or coronavirus, and you want to see how that may affect capitalism. And if you don't want to have to search for everything that's happened, you can click on Tools here in the kind of right-hand side of your search. You can click on Tools, and then you can click Arrange. So if maybe I want something in the past month. And if you look here now, everything will have been edited or published within the last month. And all of these kind of take into account recent events. They may be opinion articles. So they'll be less rigorous than maybe the type of journal articles you'd get if you were just doing a regular search, but it can help with that element of recency. If you're cutting uniqueness updates or just information about what the world looks like right now and you want more recent stuff, this can be really helpful. And it's important to note that you can do things in a custom date range. So let's say you're researching arguments about terrorism. If you want arguments that don't take into account things like 9/11, you can search up everything from before 9/11, which can give you older perspectives that aren't influenced by recent events. That's kind of an older event, but maybe you want stuff about virus response that were relevant before coronavirus, etc. This can have a lot of different utility, which means it can be really helpful if you want to have your search be in a time frame that's different from what you would usually search up. So that can help in a lot of different contexts. So it can be nice to play around with that. So those were the tips about using Google, but there are searches outside of Google, and it's kind of helpful to look outside of Google when you're doing searches because different search engines prioritize different things. Google can prioritize things like newspaper results or blogs, but if you want different types of sources, maybe you don't want to look up those types of information. So we'll go through 4 different types of searches and search engines. You can actually make your own with a little bit of research. Google allows you to create custom search engines, as we'll see in a moment. But these are just some kind of helpful and popular ones. and I'll make sure to send these out in chat as well. So first is Google Scholar. As is kind of implied in the name, it'll search only scholarly resources. So it'll search up lists of books. It'll search through scholarly journals. It'll search through official publications. Because of coronavirus, it shows on the front page all of these different medical journals. But if you want to look through legal journals and you have like a query relating to a legal concept, then you can search it up here and you'll actually get kind of legal scholars writing about those different queries. Whereas if you search up a piece of law, maybe you'd have information for criminal defendants, which, while helpful, may not be what you're looking for in a research context. So if I search up capitalism here, instead of getting like the Google definition in the Wikipedia page, I get articles from journals, I get books, and obviously capitalism is a pretty broad search, but and you get like 2 million results. But as you narrow it more and more, you can get more targeted stuff. And as you see, it'll prioritize things that are really important in the literature, which is why they're a little older. So this has been basically what Google Scholar has is something called cited by. So let's say there's a very popular article that's referenced in the literature, but you don't want to look at that article itself. You want to see refutations of that article. You can click on the cited by button, and what will pop up is different articles that reference or cite the article you were originally looking at. And so these articles can be responding to that article, or they can be building on it from a more recent viewpoint. And so using that cited by element can be really helpful if you want to go deeper on your research in a particular field. It can also just show you how reliable a particular article is. Since this article has been cited 15,000 times in the last 5 years, you can surmise that it's a really popular article, it's a really important article, and a really helpful one. So maybe you'll look at that over the one that's only been cited 1,000 times, for example. And so it can also help you gauge the reliability and the importance of a particular article. Finally, you can click on the all X number of versions. So as you can see, there are a lot of different places where this article is hosted. It's hosted on Wiley Online Library, which has a paywall. So if you just clicked on that original link, you would have come up to the paywall version. You wouldn't have been able to access it. But if you look on the all different versions, you can see that Google will give you links to different websites where there's a free version of the link. And because of that, you can access these different articles for free, and it'll give you that automatically. So this is a very helpful element that can help you search up different relevant elements of different. It'll help you access more articles, essentially, which can be very helpful, especially when things are behind a paywall. So that was Google Scholar. Let me just put this. Probably should have done this at the start, but here in the link itself. So that's Google Scholar. Next on our list is the think tank search. So what this does is it searches a list of, let me send this also. What this will do is it searches a list of 1,200 think tanks and research centers that are very, very reliable. They're curated by different Harvard librarians, so obviously very smart people who know a lot about reliable think tanks. So you might ask, what are think tanks? Think tanks are basically organizations of people and policy scholars, sometimes with government backgrounds, who do a lot of research, and they put out what are called white papers, which basically advocate for a particular position or a particular policy, or they describe a certain situation that's happening. It might describe the economy or the state of education or counterterrorism operations. And so searching these can be very helpful for finding in-depth research relating to the topic that you want to research. So if you're searching up stuff about criminal justice policy, then you could use the think tank search to find different recommendations or different policies that people use. So if I just search up criminal justice reform, And what this is, it'll go to this Google link because this is a custom search engine using Google. And now you'll get trends from the Sentencing Project or from Pew, which can show polls, or from the Brennan Center. So these are all different criminal justice reform related think tanks, which can help you can use this to find different relevant think tanks, which you can search on your own time, or you can just use this to find search a lot of different think tanks and find policy reforms or different trends and information. So the think tank search can be really helpful if you're looking for different policies or for different harms. Some examples of popular think tanks that offer a wide variety of information are the Brookings Institution. It's more of a center-left publication. There's the Heritage Foundation, which provides conservative viewpoints. And then there's the Center for American Progress, or CAP, which provides left or liberal viewpoints or progressive viewpoints on what should happen. So obviously a lot of different think tanks cover a lot of different ideologies. So whatever you're searching for may be encompassed within the think tank search. And this is way different than the blogs you may the blogs or news articles you may come up with if you're just searching up on Google, which makes it really helpful. Third is the independent news search. This is another custom search engine that I've found when doing my research. And it can be pretty helpful in helping you find left-leaning sources. So when you're researching critiques, for example, and usually you would research through more scholarly articles. But if you want to find something that's maybe more recent, maybe takes into account more recent events while still maintaining a left perspective for your critique, then you can search through this database of alternate news. So here, this is searching up the International Socialist Review, the searched up Monthly Review, which is another leftist publication. The search is The Intercept, which is a leftist news source. And basically what you can see is all of these may be critical of capitalism, instead of having defenses of capitalism that you might see on Google, which is generally more centrist. So this can be helpful when you're doing critical research, when you're doing left-leaning research, and you want to see left-leaning positions on different events, which can be helpful, especially if there's a particular resolution that has an inherently left-leaning premise, like criminal justice reform, for example. So independent news search, pretty helpful when you're researching Ks or critical arguments or left-leaning arguments. Finally, there's Google News. You can just search it up at news.google.com. What most people use it for is just a news aggregator. Usually it has like more serious information, like here it talks about the political news. Here the top result is about like TikTok and Trump because like 2020, I guess. But basically the point is you can get a lot of different news here and it'll sum up the top stories of the day. Now, you can also use it for research, though, if you don't want to just learn about the current news. So if I want to search up about the state of the economy, I can just search up economy. It's a pretty bad search, but here there's an article from an hour ago, literally very, very recent, showing why the U.S. economy is recovering, or information from yesterday showing how the global economy is even worse and not recovering. And so you can see how it'll prioritize really recent information, even if that's a lower quality, right? This is just political news, not really about the economy, but it'll be really recent. So if you're looking for uniqueness updates or things that summarize what a situation is like for the purpose of a debate, and you're doing this like the night before a tournament, it can be really helpful for you to have the most recent evidence that you need for a tournament. If you're doing research for the politics dissad, for example, it can also be helpful in finding information about like a recent bill that might be passing and what the latest information is about that. So either using the recency search tools on Google itself or using Google News can be really helpful. And kind of the distinction between the two is that this will only search newspapers, whereas this will search a lot of other things that aren't just newspapers but are also recent. As you get more research, like if you search a past hour, it'll almost all be newspapers. but there is a kind of a difference in what it'll prioritize in searching up. So kind of to summarize, because that was a lot of different information, Google Scholar is good for scholarly articles, think journals and books. Think tank search is good, and Google Scholar can help with all types of research, really. Think tank search can help you with looking up, maybe in a more policy context, potential solutions to an issue or evidence that shows the magnitude of a particular issue. And it'll show it from all different viewpoints. The independent news search will show things more from a left-leaning viewpoint and can be helpful for critical research, which generally leans left. And finally, if you're looking for research about more recent information or information about like objective elements of news, like you need to show objectively like a certain bill has passed, you want to use Google News because it won't usually make an argument or something. It'll just be telling you facts. So that was different search engines. So kind of to conclude our discussion of search terms and finding different elements of searching, we'll go over some don'ts of research. So what should you not do when you're doing research? First, you don't want to give up too fast. Research is all about perseverance. If you do an initial search and it doesn't work out, you don't want to stop there. You want to keep going through it because you can refine your search and do better. Second, you want to do background work. It's really important to use terms of art or really commonly used terms in the literature of the topic when you're doing your searches, because smart people who are well-versed in the area you're searching up will use those terms of art. If I search up like money system, that'll not really get me good results. Whereas if I search up something like capitalism, I get more scholarly approaches to a particular task because most people talk about capitalism, not the money system. Third is that is not going past page 1. Page 1 may not have the best results because Google isn't researching in debate context. It's researching in what do most people want to know context, and those can diverge. The trick with searching up 100 different search results can help with this, but it's important to not just be limited to what's in the first search result. It's also important not to use debate jargon. This is kind of intuitive, but using like capitalism solves warming, or capitalism is the internal link to warming. All of these are not how people usually write. And so it's important to make sure when you're searching up for an argument that you're not using debate jargon, because that'll skew your results. Finally, you don't want to use too many words. As I mentioned earlier, every word you use reduces the number of results given. So you want to use synonyms or the or function instead. And this is a common mistake, so remember that. Next, we'll kind of go over when you found an article, what you want to do once you've found it, but you can't access it. A lot of different articles will have paywalls, so you may not be able to access them. Actually, this is a book, so it's probably not a good example. But when you're searching up an article, you may not be able to access it. So like this investor capitalism article, I'm not sure, but let's give it a sec to load. Yeah, so as you can see, I can't really access the article itself here. So you might be wondering, well, what do I do if I can't find this article? Maybe it looks really good and I want to know about like the shares held by money managers or something, but I can't access it. So there are a couple of ways legally to get access to these articles without like pirating them. The first is unpaywall, unpaywall.org. I'll send this out to. Basically, what Unpaywall is it's a database of like millions of different scholarly articles, and you can search through it. If you don't want to have to manually go through it, good news, they have an extension on Chrome that you can just install. And once you install, it'll give this icon that will show up if there are open access versions. For this article, there aren't, but for a lot of articles there are, and can really be really helpful in directing you to those. As we mentioned before, you can also use Google Scholar, the related versions feature, and that can help you find these free access elements. So that's finding scholarly articles. Because those are professional and thus have tighter limitations, it's harder to find open access versions of those. But another thing you might run into is newspapers, things like the New York Times or the Washington Post. I won't go into these into too much detail, but there are a lot of different ways you can use. First, you can just go into incognito. Usually after you look up a certain number of articles per month, the newspaper will block you from viewing any more. But if you go into incognito, sometimes it'll reset the amount of articles you can look at. And when you max out that incognito tab, you can just close it and close the incognito window and reopen a new one, and then it'll be reset and you can view as many articles as you want. If that doesn't work, you can also use a new browser. So I usually search using Chrome, but if I want to search up using Firefox or something, I can do that because the cookies may not transfer over to a different browser. Speaking of cookies, what you can do is clear your cookies. Now, what are cookies? Cookies are basically just pieces of information that websites save to your computer while you're browsing it so they can track different elements about you. They use it for like ads, so advertisers can figure out what you look at usually, and they can use it to track how many times you visit a website. But what you can do is you can go to Chrome://settings. This is Chrome specific, and you can just click on privacy and security, and you can reset things like cookies, or you can control what sites can show you cookies and what sites cannot show you cookies, and you can kind of set that all up, which can be very helpful. Third, you can use things like the Wayback Machine. Basically, these are archival techniques that basically you can put in here. You can basically give it a URL and it'll save it, and then it'll help you view it. So sometimes these are able to get past a search, like get past a paywall that you won't usually be able to get past. And the same goes true for the Internet Wayback Machine. You can just search that up. Another thing is that Google has what are called cached pages. So if you click here, if you just go in Google regularly and you look at this top portion, you click the down arrow, you can click on cached, and it'll show you a cached page, basically, which is Google regularly takes screenshots, and it'll save it for you to look at, and so that can get past it. Finally, certain browsers like Safari or Firefox have what is called a reading mode, which strips away like all the ads and images and stuff. That can also get rid of paywalls. You can use outline.com to do that as well. We're running a little over time, so this is cutting a little into questions, but I want to get through these last couple of slides. So navigating journal articles. This might be hard sometimes. Well, actually, this is a full book, I think. So not exactly what we're looking for, but there are a couple of different elements of a journal article. You have the abstract and the conclusion. Both of those will try and summarize the content of the article, and so it can be helpful to look at those to figure out quickly whether an article has what you're looking for. You want to do this instead of reading the whole article, because if you have like 10 different articles queued up from a search, then it can be difficult to you won't have enough time to look through them, basically. And so you want to be able to quickly figure out if an article is helpful or not, and using those two elements will be good. Sometimes the methodology can be helpful, but if you're looking at like a quantitative analysis, for example, then the methodology will mostly be like equations, so that might not be helpful. Also, using Control F is really helpful. If you have a couple of search terms, like let's say you have 3 search terms, Google will probably find a good article that has 2 out of those 3 search terms in abundance, and then like 1 of those search terms that's like really rare. So you want to use the find function to search up the search term that is rare. So for example, in the search capitalism collapse, maybe there are a lot of articles that talk a lot about capitalism, but they only use the phrase collapse once or twice. You can search for the phrase collapse within those articles to find articles that actually talk about what you're looking for. Finally, you should use footnotes. Research articles will have footnotes where they refer to other articles that expand on what they've referred to. So this can help you find new sources that are really embedded within the literature, so they'll be high quality because some other author has already done the process of research and found the best article on that issue. It'll also refer you even to specific page numbers, which can really narrow down what you're looking for. Finally, what articles are the best? Is this finally? Yeah. So what articles are the best? You'll have to balance between author qualifications and recency. If I'm looking for information about like the latest bill on coronavirus that has passed, I'll want to look at recency way more than author qualifications because it'll be like a staff writer that has written that publication. But if I'm looking for a really deep study on capitalism, then maybe the one from 2013 by a full professor at a research university will be way better than the one from like yesterday by like a grad student. So it's important to look at context and see if you want something that's deeper in analysis, prioritizing author qualifications, whereas if you want something that's recent, prioritizing recency. Something else that's helpful is looking at the trustworthiness of a site. I'll send this really helpful graphic into chat. And basically what's helpful about this is that it tells you about these different publications and where they are on the ideological spectrum. And it'll also tell you if they're reliable or not. So in the mainstream, you'll have like these really center-leaning news publications like the New York Times or NPR or PBS. These will just report the facts. But if you're looking for analysis, maybe you'll go to the New Yorker or Foreign Policy or The Economist or National Review, depending on what element of the spectrum. And so you can look at this maybe because we're running low on time later, but it'll show you the scale from like completely fake to completely factual reporting. And it can also show you what's news, what's a fair interpretation of the news, and then what's kind of made up or nonsense. So this is really helpful if you find a new resource that you're unfamiliar with. It can be really helpful to figure out where on the spectrum it lies. And there's a reproduction of this in the PowerPoint. Finally, what about cutting cards? This is kind of beyond the purview of this lecture because this was about finding articles that are good for cards. If you're curious, check out on the EDI website Joanne's article about how to cut a card. Finally, some closing thoughts. This will be brief, but this was a lot of info. It'll be difficult to phase these into your pieces into research immediately. And so what you want to do is gradually maybe keep a list of these different tips and try and phase them into your research. Another thing is that it's never too early to research. Whether you're a senior in your last year of debate or a freshman just starting out, learning early on how to do research will always help you in your career. Research is a skill, just like speaking or giving rebuttals, and it's important to practice that skill because the better at research you are, the better your evidence will be and the better your positions will be. So it's good to use times when you have a lot of free time, like summer or winter, or like breaks, like spring or winter break, to practice the skill of research so that you can get really good at it. Because ultimately, it takes a lot of practice to get really good at research. So that's the presentation. If you have any questions, just put those into chat. If you want me to extrapolate on like a particular concept that I went over, or like a search term or a trick, or if you have a question about research that you've stumbled into, I can answer any of those. So just let me know in the chat if you have any of those. Also, if you're able to, give a thumbs up or a message in chat if you don't have any questions. Yeah, I can email out the slides. The question was just, can you share out the slides? I'll email out the slides for the people that are on the email list, and I'll when this is uploaded as a video, there will be like a description. I'll include all of the different links that I put, plus a link to this PowerPoint that'll be shared. Yeah. Automatic card cutting softwares. I would not recommend using them just because card cutting is a very it's an art, really. There are elements when you're doing like really intricate card cutting. Not only are you trying to summarize good elements of the article, like obviously you want to have the card represent what you want to find, but also you want to cut it in a very efficient manner. And what these automatic card cutting softwares do is basically they have you write a tag and they just use those as keywords to underline. So automatic card cutting softwares are not really that smart in actually cutting cards. And ultimately, it just takes a degree of nuance that a human has to do in finding, okay, what part of this article can I use for this block that I want to make, or for this argument that I need to make, etc. And a computer ultimately can't recognize that. So maybe if you're like getting used to card cutting, you can use automatic software, but like even then, I would just recommend practicing using card cutting. And you can look up on the high school wikis, either hsld.debatecoaches.org or hspolicy.debatecoaches.org. And basically, advanced debaters will have posted their cards in full from all of the debates that they've had. And so you can use that to see how cards should look like, which will help you with figuring out what good cards look like better than using automatic card cutting software.